I'm Cameron Adams, and my perspective is anthropology. I've trained as a medical anthropologist, and I've worked in the field of sort of traditional medical anthropology for quite a while. About, 5 years ago now, 6 years ago now, I shifted my focus and I became fascinated by the psychedelic community, not as a group of people or as a subculture, but as a culture itself. And by this I mean a group of people with their own traditions, their own ways of behaving, their own ways, language and discourse. I began to do this research on the internet because I had just quit my academic career to raise my daughter full-time, and I couldn't travel away to exotic lands, and I couldn't work during the day. So asynchronous, not at the same time conversations with the culture online became the best way to continue doing research. Yep. So what I found with this online research on the psychedelic community started triggering my habits and my interests in medical anthropology. And therefore, I focused specifically on the discourses, the discussions, and the use of concepts of healing and medicine. And I pursued that. I wanted to know, what does healing mean to the psychedelic community? What is medicine to the psychedelic community? And I pursued this research for quite a while. And this research led me to, through the work of Roland Griffiths, who does the psilocybin end-of-life anxiety studies, and how the mystical experience itself seemed to have the healing potential locked up in it, as opposed to necessarily biochemical stuff, though I think there is quite a bit of that as well. And the process of healing using the mystical model matches a psychological model called salutogenesis. Salutogenesis are the forces that make us healthier, make us better. And what we have in our traditional Western biomedical model is the reduction of pathogenesis, which raises us to a particular level of health, which is considered no longer pathological, no longer ill. The unfortunate side effect of this is quite good for acute issues, but it gets us just barely healthy enough to float along. And if any kind of interruption to health happens, we dip down below into the pathological state. Salutogenesis, or the things that are salutogenic, are able to pull you up above that baseline. So if there's an insult to your health, stresses, whatnot, you're still above and able to continue in a healthy way. And this was all elaborated in the 1970s through the work of a man called Antonovsky, who was studying Auschwitz survivors. And these Auschwitz survivors, he wasn't interested in the ones who were broken, because you know why they were broken. It was very obvious why they were broken. He wanted to know why the ones who thrived after that experience thrived, and he developed this model. It matches the model of mysticism in that what he found was, if you feel you're part of something bigger, a bigger plan, and you feel integrated within that, the sense of unity, the unitive experience of the mystical experience, and that there's a plan, God's plan or whatever it is you claim, or that you see, it allows you to work through these difficult states and be healthy. And through various testing mechanisms, surveys, interviews, and whatnot, it was able to find, a lot of people have researched this now, that if you have high salutogenic factors, you're less likely to miss days of work, you're less likely to have heart attacks, you're less likely to be morbid with other diseases. Morbid is ill, as opposed to mortality, which is killing. And so it seems to have very powerful biological effects. And so this fascinated me, and I've done a lot of work on this. However, I've always sort of noticed this little monster, this little demon up on the corner of this research. And it seemed to be forces that fight or undermine the salutogenic effects of psychedelics. And this is what I'm going to be talking about today. Gregory Bateson, an anthropologist back in the 1930s, came up with an idea. It's another Genesis idea, schismogenesis. The forces that drive a community apart, causes schisms within a community. What he was trying to find out at the time using this theoretical construct was that why in colonial situations do some colonial interactions work out positively, both cultures integrate, everything goes really nicely, and why in other contexts you have revolutionary problems, enslavement, and nobody likes each other, and it just never really works out. And yes, this was, of course, part of a colonial project, but it was also, if it does work out for everybody, it is better for everybody on the ground. So, this idea of schismogenesis got me thinking about how different people presented themselves on the online forums I was studying. And almost always, when somebody joined the forum, there was this little prologue, and it was very similar across the way. And the model prologue, or a sort of synthetic creation of it, would be, wow, I'm so glad I found you guys. I don't know anybody who trips. I feel so alone. I have nobody who I can talk to about this. All the factors that are against salutogenesis. I'm alone. I'm not part of something bigger. I'm afraid. I'm getting depressed about it. I'm isolated. As Durkheim called that anomie, and is highly correlated with suicide, as it turns out. So this was something that was always in the background. If these things are powerfully healing, what's going on with this stuff which can undermine it? Now, this triggered something very important in me because psychedelics broke me. And about, it's 25 years ago now, I think, I took a lot of acid, went to Epcot Center, and had a psychotic break. And I was unable to even consider these substances. They were out of my realm of experience, and I had mild situational paranoia for 20 years. And then I ran into this healing stuff about psychedelics, was able to use them to repair the damage caused by them. LSD caused it, Salvia divinorum repaired it. I don't think it has to do with the substance itself, but those just happened to be the ones I was using at the time. So I felt that this aspect needed to be explored. When I talk about the healing of psychedelics in contexts like this, breaking convention, I am preaching to the converted. You guys aren't the ones who were broken by psychedelics, or you wouldn't be here. I didn't want to have anything to do with these things for ages. And it was just a strange historical moment that forced me back into the world, that kind of drew me in, kind of like the mafia in Godfather. And so it was time. And so I was fascinated by the healing power in this context of anti-salutogenic context. But also, I found it very interesting when people were going to the jungles and taking them in cultural contexts which accepted these substances, where they were legal, people had fewer bad outcomes than you would find on the street. Or in clinical tests. So I know a gentleman, Robin Carhart Harris, who puts people in these horrible contexts while tripping on mushrooms or MDMA in a MRI, going bum, 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 and they're not having horrible experiences. There have been a couple that weren't that great, but you would think that would be a very bad environment to trip, considering set and setting. But the set and setting was also involved in, you're safe. There are doctors here, people who know what they're doing. You're not gonna die. Also, it's legal. I'm supposed to be doing this. It's for research. And these types of contexts are mitigating the potential negative effects caused by societal context. So what are the schismogenic effects? Primarily, they're illegal. The illegality of them cuts to the core of our very nature as social animals. We want to fit in somewhere, somehow. And if we're doing something that's illegal, even though we know it's a farce that it is illegal, still cuts. I can't talk to my family about this. This is something important to me. I have to keep it hidden. I'm in the closet. And like I mentioned, I'm the only tripper in this community. Now, this is obviously not true. You're getting your stuff from somebody. That person has a market, so there's obviously people all around. But there's this sense that I'm the only one because nobody talks about it. And at Breakin Convention, one of the most powerful experiences I had were how many people in the audience, if you took the audience, it was like a transect of community. It wasn't just young dreadlocked hippies. There were elderly, young, male, female, business people, vicars, everything. It was an amazing transect. And that's what the main thing most people told me was, this was great. I felt like I belonged here. I could just talk about these things I could never speak about again, or in other contexts. And as I mentioned, the anomie, the alienation. So, there's these two forces, the salutogenic force and the schismogenic force. And they interact with the very process or the very context or the effects of psychedelics. So I'm not going to try to tell you what psychedelics do in every context, but there's a few key points I think are important to this very subject. As my friend said, that number 4 on your outline is a whole talk in itself, and he's right. Sometimes, if you take a high enough dose and your set and setting is appropriate, you can have these very powerful mystical experiences, that merging with everything, that really opening of the heart chakra. I love everything, everything is me. And this led directly to the world ecological movement. These people who started ecology were trippers. And they saw these connections between everything, and it has manifested itself as a fairly standard dry science where people are actually doing this work. But this only happens sometimes, but that is tied into the salutogenic effects. But one of the things I think they almost always do, and this is where the term psychedelic comes from, mind manifesting. Well, what does the mind do? What is manifest in what the mind does? Every one of us, being humans, is a linguistic animal, a highly cognitive animal, lots of forebrain doing stuff. What we do is every single thing in the environment around us is embedded with meaning. That is not simply a chair. There's prototypes of chairs, what chairs are supposed to be like. This is sort of a chair, this is sort of not a chair, this is maybe a stool, but it's still something to sit on. Apples are all apples and you can eat them. There's a meaning of apples with religious context. The colors of things bring up other memories. There's experience, modeling, and all this thing. Every single thing we experience is full and completely embedded with meaning. And psychedelics make this extremely obvious. And we start seeing patterns in this sets of meaning. Now, when we're tripping and we see a fence or a sign, that fence means something. It's not just a thing blocking you from going in. That's also somebody saying, that's mine. And it means you have no right to go there. Various other things. All these meanings become manifest that you ignore most of your life because, as we all know, the reducing valve idea, you would be paralyzed if you're constantly looking at all the possibilities of meaning. But this becomes so personal that we misappropriate the meaning as general meaningness to meaning to me. That fence is telling me I don't belong there. Or that CCTV camera is looking at me. Of course it's looking at you, but it's not looking at you. It's not personalized. I don't know if anybody read Catch-22? The key catch in Catch-22 is I don't want to go to war. I don't want to go out there. Why? They don't like me. They hate me. No, they don't. They don't hate you. They don't even know you. But they're trying to kill me, you know? If they don't hate me, why would they try to kill me? And this is the catch. It's true, but it's also not true. And so we misappropriate this as personalized meaning, which in quite contrast to the rhetoric and the ideas of ego death that are very commonly attributed to psychedelics, this is a hyper-egoic state. It is all about me. And this hyper-egoic state is essentially the same thing as paranoia. They're chasing me. They're watching me. That person laughing is laughing at me, right? It's all about me. And so without the proper training or guidance in use of psychedelics, we can overemphasize this aspect and become paranoid, as I have. And there's talk about the paranoid effects of cannabis in particular. And these are legitimate concerns. But basically, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not watching you. You are breaking the law. The police, if they think you're breaking the law, and depending on who you are, what race you are, what social class you are, and whether or not they have a quota to meet, will cite you, maybe throw you in jail, and you can lose your ability to get an education, all these sorts of things. So the paranoia is not irrational paranoia. It's rational. It's based on an empirical understanding of what's going on in the world. So the CCTV cameras are looking at you, and when they decide to follow your trail through them, they can follow you through them. If they're listening to your communications, there's far too many communications to listen to all of them, but if they decide to pick on you, yes, they can take that thread. And it's not that there are issues of power and misappropriation of power. I'm not saying that. And particularly what I'm saying is it's not a drug effect. The drugs don't make you paranoid. Society makes you paranoid. Thank you. So this is a problem, and power is using power to maintain power, and we become very aware of this. But we misappropriate this generalized aspects of power and illegality and whatnot in a way that, and when it's happening in a good way, we talk about it in terms of synchronicity, right? Ah, that meaning is coming to me and it's good. And as conspiracy, when it's not working for you, right? And the problem with conspiracies is that we're all involved in conspiracies, every one of us. In this room, we're involved in a conspiracy to try to legitimize and make acceptable the use of psychedelics. There are conspiracies against that. There are small conspiracies of people trying to make a little bit of money off somebody else, but conspiracies are everywhere. Anytime any group of people get together with a common interest, it's a form of a conspiracy. But when we look at these patterns, and nature's full of them and society's full of them, we get what are called emergent patterns. A bunch of people acting sort of on their own, but it looks like a big plan. So we misappropriate this general being watched and general aspect of meaning to meaning towards me to their doing this to me, particularly when we are disenfranchised or subcultural or pushed to the side. It's not, I don't believe, that there's the Illuminati out there controlling everything, but a lot of people with the same cultural model of personal and individualistic gain doing that and becoming groups of people who get gain over other people. It's kind of like saying, I don't know sports, terrible metaphor for me to use, but just because this team is better at that sport, they've actually conspired against the other teams to keep them down by making it impossible, breaking the kneecaps of everybody who might play for them or something like that. They're better at this game, the capitalistic power game that we find ourselves involved in, and all of us to some degree interacting with, but not exactly at the top. Now, yeah, perfect timing. This is not just about how this conspiracy theory comes from and the negative effects of psychedelics. We kind of all know that. I also have some ideas about how to get past it, and I'll talk about some of the work I've been doing as well. First off, humans really are one, and we are one with the environment. There's no us without the environment. I'm not here without the flowers and plants making the air. You know, where do you draw the lines between me and you? Is it the skin? Is it the energetic body? Is it the social context? We are all one. Particularly humans, we are one species, and we all have the same brains and the same motivations, fears, desires. These are basic concepts of the human existence. Belong to something, get your food, get your shelter, reproduce, and then start working up through more spiritual processes. Every one of these things, however, is mediated by culture. Everything we've learned and experienced over our life about how to be humans. Robert Anton Wilson talks about reality tunnels. I think this is a very powerful idea, that the universe is non-simultaneously apprehended. In other words, we don't know everything at the same time. There's no way. We do not have the apparatus for this. So the little bits and pieces that we know are like a tunnel in this big matrix, kind of like an ant farm, you know? And we're in this little tunnel, and someone over here is in this little tunnel. And sometimes our tunnels merge and meet, and these are the people that we share beliefs and ideas with. Sometimes they're completely far apart from each other. But it doesn't mean they're not in the same reality. But their tunnel in the reality is different. So this is important. And by looking at somebody else's, say, reality tunnel as if it's evil or wrong is the same process as racism or ethnocentrism in terms of anthropology. They're different than us. They're completely different than us, and therefore wrong. In the New World, when the first explorers came around, every tribe and the community they ran into was like, oh, those people over there, they have tails, and they have to dig holes in the dirt so they can sit down, and they're cannibals. And you know, all these crazy stories about the other, us and them, us and them. Humans do this all the time. And this is the same sort of thing that ultimately led to the anti-Semitism in Europe and the Nazi gas chambers. They're different. There's something wrong with them. The propaganda, the culture, they're different. They're different. They're different. They're a different type of thing. And this is exactly the same process I see in stuff like David Icke's ideas of reptilian powerful overlords. You look close enough, you can see the nictating membranes. They eat our babies. I've been accused of eating babies, being a tall, blonde, blue-haired white man working in Latin America. I have never once eaten a baby, I swear. Though they'll never listen to me. And but these ideas are always there. And there's a reason for that. It looks like they're actively taking from us, right? The economic system is that there's winners and losers. And when there's a pie of economy, if somebody's slice is bigger, somebody else's is smaller. And in the context of Latin America, people who looked like me showed up and actually enslaved people and caused diseases and stuff. There are real sources of these things, but they get elaborated into these crazy stories, mythological stories. And the only way to get past this is to avoid those schismogenic forces I talk about, the rift between these two communities. So what's happened, the rift that I'm talking about, is I use psychedelics and I've healed myself with them. I'm a better person, healthier person for their use, right? And I tell this to one of my dad's business friends, and he's like, well, it's quite clear you've gone insane like they say you will, because drugs are bad. All drugs are bad. The only drugs they have a model for the vast majority of people are alcohol and heroin. It makes you stupid, clumsy, brutal, and you're completely addicted and you can't get off of them. The model of addiction and stupidity. This is what they think all drugs do. It's astounding. You start talking to people. They don't realize that psychedelics are a completely different thing. Just like tobacco, just like sugar, all these different drugs they do and they feel the effects of. And yet somehow when it's called illegal, it becomes this different thing. They all become the same. That's that same process that leads to racism as well. It's that same mind quirk. We got to get past that. And what happens is I know I'm right because I've been healed. They know they're right because they've never met anybody who's used psychedelics that's like them. You know, some hippie out in the party playing drums, so that's a bit weird, you know. Ooh. And the Ibogaine film, one of the little films in the Ibogaine talk we had yesterday, really pointed this out. They were talking about, there's this drug that might cure addiction, but we don't know about it. And then they show a Bwiti ceremony that had nothing to do with the drug they took, which is a psychedelic thing, but it's the dance and the painted face, and it triggers all this crazy 1950s, the voodoo, you know, curse type stuff, and this crazy witchcraft, and they're shaking and going like this. They don't see that as a dance, as a part of a ceremony. They see it as a drug effect, and this is what's going to happen to you if you take it, even though it might cure you of your addiction. So you got to be careful about these images projected from both sides. When we don't believe each other about the things we know, or think we know, we start to question their motives. They're lying about that, and it's to keep me down. Maybe, maybe not. They're maybe trying to help you, but it looks like they're trying to keep you down, and they're telling you you're wrong and you're stupid. It happens on both sides. You stop believing anything else they say. Because if they'll lie about this one thing, they'll lie about anything to get their way. And this is happening on both sides. And this is the schismogenic thing. Nobody's willing to cross those bridges necessarily. Some people are. But that's what needs to be done. Building these bridges and communication channels. And that has to come from us. We are the ones without the power, without the resources in general, without the clout. It's a bigger, more powerful, and more mainstream group. They have no need to bring in the alternatives. And if we want our rights and to feel and be in a context where we can maximize the value of these substances, we need to make the effort. We need to cross the bridges. We need to go out there and talk to people and know what we're talking about. And it's got to be us, like I said. And what I have found in my work, I was an academic for a while. I still am an academic, but a hobbyist. I teach at a school for what they call disaffected youth. These are kids who've refused education. They are violent, terrified. They've been abused their whole lives. Everything sets them off. And I walked into work. I got hired. They knew I was a drug researcher when they hired me. And I walked into work and I looked around and I started telling all my colleagues and my bosses, they need psychedelic therapy, probably MDMA therapy. That's probably the best thing we can do for them. And they're all like, I work for the government and I'm saying this, you know. And they all thought I was a bit of a loon. Well, I am a bit of a loon, but a serious one and a very, very persuasive one. And I've got some very conservative people thinking that this might not be such a bad idea. And they won't do it illegally, but they're willing to entertain these ideas. And I've given my boss the book from Breakin Convention, which has a history and applications of psychedelics, and she's read it. She finds it very fascinating. Give them essays and different works about how psychedelics might be engageable or engaged in these types of contexts in these populations. And I think this is a best place to start with mainstream society. Mainstream society tends to be quite materialistic. So the way to talk to them tends to be material. This can heal grandma. Everybody knows somebody with cancer. Everybody knows at some level cancer, PTSD, cluster headaches. But there's something out there that has touched everybody's life. And psychedelics have a wide spectrum of clinically shown applications. And this is a very, very good place to start. And that's why we're able to do medical research as opposed to other research as well. If people are dying, we can happily risk, right? Because you're not going to kill them, which is what they're all afraid of. So I think this is a good place to start, and this is what I've been doing in my work. I've gotten to the point where I was able to get time off for this conference, time off for the Breakin Convention, and paid by the government to do that. Because they believe what I'm doing is actually decent work. And this is the bridge, these little bridges that we're building. And I'm in a very specialized context. If I was in mainstream school, I'd have been fired years ago. Well, 2 years ago when I started. And only after establishing these ground contexts that we share, you can start talking about recreation and spirituality and all these other aspects of it. But I think you need to get that common ground that's comfortable to a materialistic, rationalistic, atheistic society. And these become engaging. I've been able, my dad's brother, who's the most conservative guy I know, is talking about maybe going to Colorado and smoking some weed, you know, hey, and just shocking, you know, it's like, you know, weird guy, you know, he builds cars. And mows the lawn 4 times a day because he's bored. These types of things. So, and he's thinking of engaging in this simply, first off, because Colorado has legalized it. But I've been talking to him for years. I spoke to my dad's colleagues at my father's funeral about what I was doing, and they really listened because they knew me as a person. They trusted me. They trusted my father, so they trusted me. They knew I wasn't just some wacko. And so through these processes, what we're becoming and what we need to become are emissaries for the psychedelic culture, every one of us. We're the ones who are going to do it. They're never going to come into our community trying to understand us. It's a colonial system they're from. They want to take us over. Not because they're evil, but that's what they do. That's their culture. So we need to be the emissaries, ready at those borders to communicate with them, make the deals with them, interact with them, and finally build relationships. And what I want to leave you guys with at this point is essentially, since we're all emissaries, we need to act like it. And that means be educated about all the materials that are possible to use in this discussion. Be calm and rational about how you interact with people. You don't want to make people bristle, again, especially people with more power, social power than you. And from there, maybe we can build those bridges and give us our space where the healing can be improved. So thank you very much.